Good morning, everyone. As usual, we'll start discussing the question around the tables before we get started today. So you have about 5 minutes to talk about what or where was your favorite road trip, if you've been on a road trip. If you haven't been on a road trip, where would you like to take a road trip to? I guess would be a good question. And we will be back in about 5 minutes.
I can tell. He's pretty breaking. College students with
What's the world famous Calvary? Is that the, do we sell our products? I think it was a few years ago that Todd and Christina were the marketers and a bunch of we always do
Tampa.
I mean, that's the only but that's all I can think of.
Guys from Carolina. So playing basketball.
I'm sorry, that's all right. I dropped it. I was just
morning again. Thank you so much for being here today. We have 3 weeks in our summer series. Next week, we look forward to hearing from our students who are going to We hope you'll be here next Sunday for that. And then the following Sunday, Labor Day weekend, we wrap up the series with Ray Schramm sharing his story with us. Today, we have the pleasure of hearing from Dell Walker. We're really grateful Dell is here today to share with us. He's here standing and walking and doing well. He might stand, he might sit. I told him we understand. Do whatever he wants. Dell which includes their children Marcus, Raquel, Jada, and DJ. We have 3 of their children here today, as well as Lorene. They found Calvary to be such a place. Dell design and construction of highway and transit facilities. Of Dell's 35 years, the most recent 20 years have been continuous experience managing major alternative project delivery, APD, in rail, airport, and highway programs and projects. The project values range from $20 million to $2.3 billion and included the $1.7 billion T-Rex highway and light rail project right here in our own backyard. Much of his work has taken him throughout the U.S. and Canada. At Calvary,
Thank you, Ann, and appreciate the opportunity to give you the Dell Walker story. So I thought I'd use some visual aids to kind of give you an impression of how I grew up and how I got here. But first and foremost, I'm a military brat. So a lot of people think, oh, a brat, that's a terrible thing. No, it's a great thing. From military experience, my father was career Air Force, and I was able to grow up through that effort. And it was really interesting. It's different. You end up moving a lot, and there's a resiliency that comes from being a child of a service person. So the picture on the far left, my parents grew up in inner city Detroit, and it was a real challenge at the time. It was in the 50s that they met. My father at the age of 17 enlisted in the Army. He did a 3-year tour in the Army, came back to Detroit, and met my mother, but couldn't find any work. So he re-enlisted in the Air Force and became a career Air Force person. So I think I mentioned we moved a lot, and that was part of the deal. I don't know if you can figure out which one I am, but I'm the one sitting in my father's lap there. My parents had 4 children. I'm on the far left. My brother Bernie, my sister Latanya, and my oldest brother Leonard, right there. But having moved a lot, I ended up going to 9 different schools for my K through 12 education, which spanned 5 different states and the Republic of the Philippines. So, interestingly enough, Mick had given a presentation a few weeks ago. We were in the Philippines between 74 and 76. That was during the Saigon airlift and the baby lift. I was a young kid at the time, just before I was in high school. They asked us to go ahead and go to the gym and bring as many toys that you either didn't want or didn't want to play with anymore. And we were able to give the kids and the parents some relief and give the kids an opportunity to play with them and just take a little bit of pressure off of the parents during that period that they were struggling through. I think you all know that many of them came to the United States and Canada and went on to be very successful citizens of this country. So the next you see, I played football in high school, and I was a pretty good student, a pretty good football player. I went to Gateway High School in Aurora. So my father retired to Colorado, and I had my junior and senior years at Gateway. And I had a pretty successful campaign in my senior year and was able to obtain a scholarship to play college at Colorado School of Mines. Interestingly enough, both of my brothers were also college scholarship recipients to play football. So all three of us were able to do that. So going on to Colorado School of Mines, a very exciting time. We went there 2 days before any of the other kids were able to come to campus. We had to learn everybody's name that was on the team, as well as the position that they played. So there's 100 kids sitting in a room, and you'd be asked to know everybody that was on the team. Hey, who's that guy? That's kicker punter from Delta, and his name is blah blah. But no, it was a very interesting way to get to know other players and to get that camaraderie that you get from a team atmosphere. So the bottom picture there you can see is my college football team, and interestingly enough, I played in my first college football game on my 18th birthday. We got to fly down to Western New Mexico. It's one of the few travel trips where we actually flew. We took a bus most of the time. And I made the first tackle in my first game on my 18th birthday. It was pretty awesome. So I also decided it would be really cool to do something else. So after football season, what else am I going to do? There were some guys throwing the ball around in lacrosse. I said, hey, that looks really cool. Wouldn't mind doing that. To say, hey, come out for the team. So I did, and I picked up the game pretty quick and became pretty good. And I started as a defensive player for Mines for a number of years. What was interesting about that, another opportunity to learn and know new people. You really can't see, but number 34 there is Tim Michelle. So I met Tim on the lacrosse field. I let him tell you about some of the stories of that, but but no, it was pretty fun. So I don't know if you noticed, but the above picture is a picture of my high school football team. And the below picture is a picture of my college football team. And I'm hoping you notice I'm the only black person on the team. So having grown up in the military family and the diversity that you see and exists there, I had every expectation that that's how things were. This is the world as I know it. And then I went to Colorado School of Mines, and I was the only person on my football team, the only person on my lacrosse team, and come to find out, I'm one of 9 people out of a population of 3,000. That equates to 1/3 of 1% that were black. So back in the day, starry-eyed kid, go out to campus, see things, don't really notice exactly what's going on. Also have the coaches come to your house, different coaches from different schools coming to your house. A great thing, pretty starry-eyed. I get signed up to go to Colorado School of Mines, having no understanding of the change and the cultural difference that exists as a result of moving from this, this military collective atmosphere where it's a very diverse situation to Mines. I'm going to tell you, it was brutal. It was challenging. It was different. It was something that I struggled with. Obviously, having the camaraderie of some of the folks from the sports teams that I played with, I think was very helpful in getting me through that to a great extent. But there was an unfortunate incident that took place during my sophomore year that I felt the need to talk to you about. So I studied metallurgical engineering. It's the science of metals and their extraction, their production. A lot of people go into gold extraction as a result of graduating from mines. You can work in aluminum extraction, and then obviously the steel mills that people go to work and manufacture steel products is another thing that you can do as a result of that. So hey, this seems like a good opportunity. The school is primarily at that time totally focused on mineral engineering. This is something that I think I might like to do. Let's go ahead and do that. So I was actually in a physical metallurgy laboratory where you have your school time and then your laboratory time to get a understanding of what's going on. And I'll never forget this. It was the Rockwell hardness machine, and we were doing Rockwell hardness testing. So what that does is tells you the properties of the metal by placing an indenter down onto the metal, tells you the hardness of the metal, so you can basically figure out what it is and how it's going to function in the real world. There's 2 tips that goes on these. I was on probation for a year with the Jefferson County Police, and the school decided that there would be no punishment for him, but I would be on permanent probation for my remaining time at Mines. So, a very difficult period for me. I became extremely bitter, very disappointed at Mines. I wasn't disappointed in the police, but I was disappointed at Mines for how I was treated from that point forward. So there were some that stood by me, and there were some that did not. So the athletic director at Mines was also the lacrosse coach, and he was one that stood by me, Bruce Allison. And so I continued to play lacrosse. I stopped playing football and just took my scholarship through the lacrosse program, and that went pretty well. But I was still pretty bitter, and it was a huge struggle. So what can you do with that type of disappointment and bitterness? You can wallow in your sorrows, or you can figure out a path to be more successful in how you move forward. I took the latter path. So I decided to become more engaged in school politics. I started the first chapter of the National Society of Black Engineers on campus. We organized ourselves as a group to make sure that there was somebody you could go to make sure you could get through these types of situations. I also, during that period, I had taken on a summer internship with the Colorado Department of Highways, and I certainly found that type of work, being out in the field, being out in the sun, looking at construction projects, making sure that they work properly, that was a huge benefit that led me to believe that, hey, maybe I should do something besides become a metallurgist. And at which point I transferred to the University of Colorado at Denver and started studying civil engineering. I also decided I would work full-time for the Department of Highways, which ultimately became the Department of Transportation, and go to school at night. When I was working on a night construction job, I would go to school during the days. The people I work with worked it out pretty well, so that I didn't sleep much, but they worked it out pretty well that I could make these things happen. I also started going to schools and talking to kids, disadvantaged kids, about the benefits of being an engineer and engineering programs. I started coaching. I coached Wheat Ridge High School, and we actually won a state championship in lacrosse during the time I was there. And I also went back to Colorado School of Mines and coached the lacrosse team there. Now being a 24, 25-year-old kid coaching 20-year-olds is a whole nother story, and I could tell you about that. But I did that. But things started turning around for me. And during that period, something that helped me, something that helped turn me around was meeting my wife, Lorraine. She still takes care of me, still makes sure I'm on the up and up and doing the right things. She's the reason we're Baptists. My mother was Jehovah's Witness. It was very hard to find a Jehovah's Witness, certainly in the Philippines. There weren't many congregations there. So whenever we didn't attend I can't remember what they call them, fellowship hall or something, we would go to Baptist churches, and I'm not certain why we went to Baptist churches, but Lorraine being a Baptist, my mother having us go to Baptist churches when we weren't going to Kingdom Halls. No, it seemed like a good fit, and she's the one that helped us. We searched and found Calvary as a result of a fairly exhaustive search of all the Baptist churches around town. But I think you could say that the inclusiveness and the diversity and how you treat people, and Mary in particular, in terms of how she preached, was something that brought us here and has kept us here. So I started to mention some of my work career, but through my work with the Colorado Department of Highways. I spent 23.939, I can't remember exactly what it is, but about 23 years and 11 months working for the Department of Transportation. I can tell you that their support and my ability to move up and do lots of things was hugely important. I don't think there was ever a stagnant period in my career where I wasn't able to grow and learn and expand my knowledge and capabilities. So that was a huge plus. Okay, maybe towards the end, some issues there. But no, I was able to work on a number of interesting and great projects. This picture is a picture of 20th Street and I-25. So working on that, you can see Coors Field in the background being worked on. The copper capitals that I think turn green, so maybe don't look like they look there in the picture, but they turn green over time. But that was a really neat job. I was the assistant project engineer back in the early 90s on that one. I was able to move up, and by later in the 90s, I actually was on the first viaduct replacement project, which I'm now working on attaching work to as part of the Central 70 project. But at the time, that was the biggest construction project in the state besides Glenwood Canyon. And I was a project engineer on that. Right there, you can see the National Western Stock Show Complex and the Denver Coliseum and all of the structures work that took place there. Really neat job. I did want to talk about some of my other career elements. So I did work on the T-Rex project, and there's a slide associated with that specifically. But after T-Rex, I became the director of staff branches with CDOT. It's an executive management role. Basically, the deputy chief engineer. I oversaw all the internal engineering functions of the organization, about 300 people, and fairly neat experience, but I still had that bug to go do alternative delivery and build stuff, and I just couldn't get rid of that bug. So Lorene let me change companies. So I left the state and went to the private sector, and I was able to work on the Pioneer Crossing project in Utah. I was the design manager and engineer of record on that, and it was a diverging diamond interchange. And I don't know if people know what that means, but basically the roadway infrastructure crisscrosses, and you're allowed to make free left-hand turns rather than having a signalized turn at the interchange. I think this was the second in the nation that got built, and there's probably 50 more since then that have been built and constructed. The most recent one, I think, is in Louisville on US 36, if you ever get a chance to drive that. And then there's one down, I think, on Fillmore in Colorado Springs. So it was an innovative thing at the time, and I was able to be a part of that. So after that, I got a call from the powers that be with RTD saying, hey, we really need you to come back and help us run the Fast Tracks program. So $7.3 billion program. Dell, you're going to be in charge of everything that happens on that. Sounds really neat and interesting. How do you say no to that? So I didn't say no. I came back and ran the Fast Tracks program. Denver Union Station was going on at the time. So the Denver Union Station was under my purview. The West Rail line out to Golden. The Eagle Project, East and Gold line. So the line out to the airport and the line through Arvada was under my purview. And then they ran out of money. So I figured out as they run out of money, I was working for a bus company, and I didn't want to work for a bus company, and I still needed that, hey, you got to go do some major infrastructure stuff. So I left RTD and went back to the first company I was working with, and they had me be the alternative project delivery manager nationwide, and just so happens also in Canada. So I was going out and preaching best practices. How do you do alternative delivery? How do you make sure you're successful in the delivery of these things? And what are the efforts that you have to do to undertake those? Did that for a while, but thought I was coming back home. So needed to get home, spent a lot of time in Canada, spent a lot of time traveling. So, hey, let's get some time home. So I switched companies again and came back and did a lot of work in the state. I got to say the fire suppression system project in the Eisenhower Johnson Memorial Tunnels, I was able to do what would be the first performance-based design build that I think CDOT's ever accomplished. And it worked. I don't know if you've heard, but there's been fires in the tunnel. The fire suppression system kicks on, puts the fire out or minimizes it to the point where you can get emergency services in there to take care of it without doing damage to the structure. So I think you know how critical Eisenhower Johnson is to the state and the federal highway system. So I think that was one of the neatest experiences, being able to put something like that together. But wait, there's more. So I got called to do some work and go out to the Purple Line in Maryland, $2.3 billion P3. They needed me to be the engineer of record. And so I did that for 18 months. And I, again, felt the need to get myself home. That was 18 months, a very challenging time for my family. And so I got myself back home by coming to work with Kiewit on the Central 70 project. So I'm the technical manager right now on Central 70, making sure from a developer standpoint that everything is done right. We're overseeing the design build contract as well as the operation and maintenance contract. It's a 30-year commitment. I don't know that I'll be working in 30 years, but it's a 30-year commitment, both during the construction period and the operation and maintenance period, to make sure the job is up to snuff. So just wanted to talk to you about that. So then there's specifics on the TRX project, and Mary can tell you that during the course of the project, I was able to give her regular updates on how Hampton was coming along, and here's the traffic closures that are going to take place. But this is still, I think, the neatest project that I ever worked on. $1.67 billion program of light rail and highway infrastructure improvements, as well as a maintenance facility for the light rail. I knew nothing about light rail before this job. And I learned so much and got a great understanding of how that stuff works and how it operates. And when it opened, I think it was extremely successful. And then traffic just kind of took it over the last number of years. But no, really neat project. I got some pictures up here. Oh, and I failed to mention, dang it. So when I was working on the Pioneer Crossing job, I wrote an article for Roads and Bridges magazine. It wasn't the first article that I wrote for them. And they said, hey, we want this on the cover of our magazine. So they actually called it the King of Diamonds. And no, they put it on the cover of the magazine. I wrote it with one of my structural engineers. We actually built the bridges on site and walked them into place so that they could go in to service. So basically an overnight lane closure for the bridge building rather than building it in phases and having to take lanes any number of times. Really neat, really innovative, as well as the diverging diamond aspect. And they thought it was cool enough that they put it on the cover of their magazine. I got a copy of the magazine right here. It's not autographed or anything, but.
But it could be for a price.
So that takes me to my passion. I really enjoy coaching. The top left picture is there, me coaching Marcus up on one of his early lacrosse teams. I think that's the Cook Park. We called ourselves the Cook Park Chefs. Cook Chef. All right. The kids came up with that name, not me. The next picture is there, me coaching up DJ on his flag football team. And I got to tell this story, but interestingly enough, we scored a touchdown on the first play of every game with the exception of one. And it was a play run for DJ. So it was pretty. So the one game that he didn't score a touchdown, he got like 20 yards down the field and somebody grabbed his flag and everybody just sat there in awe on our team. How did that happen? but we also, I think we won every game but one, but we avenged that loss in the last game of the season. So I called ourselves a champ. They didn't have a championship, but I call ourselves the champions of the as a league as a result of that. I don't have any pictures of the girls' teams, but I did help out on their lacrosse teams. Okay, I guess I'm getting a maybe not. But there's a picture of myself with the Wheat Ridge high school team in 1988, and the far picture over there is the Super Bowl win in the Arapahoe Youth League, where Mark is playing football, and the team we coached went undefeated, the only undefeated team I ever coached or played in. But no, that was pretty cool. And the rest is family. So, you know, Calvary is a family, and I'm very proud to have been able to raise our kids in the atmosphere and the climate that produced through this family, and it's all because of you all and the way that you've treated us, the inclusiveness that comes from being part of this family is second to none. So that's about it. There were numerous awards on the T-Rex project, and I would guess the ones I'm most proud of are the quality awards. So at the end of the day, you can build these jobs and they can all fall apart after a period of time. But we won a number of quality awards over the course of the project, and living here, staying here, and seeing how well it's held up, I think it makes me feel the best that one and the National Quality Award that we won really makes me feel the best. So I went on, after T-Rex, I did go on kind of a national speaking tour, speaking about construction quality and all the benefits that you can get from doing alternative delivery and some of the things that we were able to accomplish there. And no, that was really neat, but that was the biggest. There was also a partnering award. So we partnered with the contractor to make sure we could be successful. So imagine the T-Rex portion was about 1.3 billion of the 1.67 billion. We procured the light rail facility separately, as well as the light rail vehicles. We procured those separately. So $1.3 billion project. There were 0 claims at the end of the day, and managing through and making sure that we could get through all of that without claims was really a big challenge, and we were successful. So we won the AGC, the Associated General Contractors, highest award for partnering, the Marvin Black Award, and it sits in my office right now, and I'm very proud of that as well.
When are you going to take over the airport project?
Yeah. Amen.
So I'm guessing you can imagine there's been some phone calls, but that one's too far gone.
Took courage to fire the contractor.
That took courage, but no, I do not plan on going back into the public sector No.
Do you have any idea at this point, the percentage of black students at the school boards?
So certainly the percentage of black students has picked up significantly since I was there. I did take a look at some of the diversity numbers as I came to the presentation. I didn't want to come without some knowledge, but I want to say it's like 4 or 5%. So it's much improved from where it was before. And you can take a look at the football pictures in their media guide as well and see that there's a little bit more diversity than there was when I was in attendance.
When did you go to Gateway?
I was at Gateway between 80 and 81.
Okay.
So I graduated in 1981.
Could you explain alternative delivery?
That's what I was gonna ask. Thank you.
So the question was, what is alternative delivery? So, and Walter could probably explain it best because he was on the forefront of all of that before the transportation industry took that on. Certainly the power industry has been doing it for quite some time. But the idea is that under a normal procurement effort, you design something. So you get a whole bunch of designers in a room and say, you guys go figure this out. Here's how it gets designed. And then you take that package and you put it out for procurement to a construction contractor and say, you guys need to go build this. The contractor then comes back and says, you know what, I would rather do something. No, we told you to build it this way. This is how you're gonna go build it. So you're not taking input from the contractor in terms of how it gets built. You're gonna tell us, yeah, a bunch of designers are gonna tell you how this is done. So that's the normal procurement practice, and it creates challenges. Certainly on bigger, more complex jobs, that's not the way you wanna do it. So the idea came up through the power industry to the transportation industry. Hey, here's a different way of doing it, a better way of doing it. Why don't you let the contractors have a say in how stuff gets built? Why don't you have them work directly with designers and design and build the work that meets their best capabilities, but still gives you what you're looking for? So earlier we were talking about retaining walls, and the retaining wall on US 36 failed, but that's a whole nother story. But it was a mechanically stabilized earthen wall that uses reinforcement straps in the soils to provide the strength of the wall and the soil mass. You can also build a cast in place wall, so a wall that is basically built reinforcing steel, concrete inside of it, and it's got a back batter that allows for it to take the loads. And yeah, you can build those and you can build them as tall as you want, but they get very expensive. These mechanically stabilized earthen walls, when built properly, are less expensive and provide you with the same product. So who gets to make that decision? What is the cutoff for when it becomes more cost effective to build one wall versus another? Hey, let's let the contractor make that decision. Let's have them work with their designers and come up with the game plan so you get a more cost effective finished product, as well as the innovation that comes from what they can bring to the table that you might not have thought of. One of the great examples is we were pretty close on price on T-Rex, but I came up with the construction timeline estimate myself, and they were able to beat my construction timeline estimate by a year. Now, I thought I was a pretty good estimator and really understood what was going on. But they basically said, you know what, we're gonna use the light rail corridor to place traffic in so we could build the highway, get everybody out of the light rail corridor once the highway's built, and then build the light rail separately. I never thought that would be the approach that they would take, and thus I missed that opportunity that they were able to present. That's the kind of innovation that comes from alternative delivery. And again, Walter and what they have done in the power industry was the impetus for the transportation industry to begin using that methodology. And T-Rex was one of the first, but it really comes from the experience that Walter brought.
Why did you have a high-speed line use different vehicles than the light rail?
So there's The question is the commuter rail versus the light rail, and when it makes sense to do one versus the other. So the interaction and connectivity down at Denver Union Station, as well as the power needs that come from a light rail versus a commuter rail, was really kind of the driving component as to why you use one versus the other. So know that the light rail system and the power generation at certain locations requires much more power than what you get from a commuter rail system, and how that all functions. The speed and how fast they're going, the slower speeds as you have more stations at closer locations on the light rail really come into play in terms of how you make the decision on one versus the other.
Do they have high-speed rails elsewhere?
So I'm not familiar with the future efforts for either CDOT or RTD, but I do know that I've heard tell that high-speed rail up to Fort Collins is being considered, and that would be a commuter rail type vehicle, and rather than a light rail type vehicle. And know that commuter rail vehicles are FRA compliant, meaning that if they get hit by a big freight train, they can survive those types of impacts. A light rail gets smacked by a commuter, an FRA compliant vehicle would be total obliteration. So based upon where the line is and how you're going to coordinate interactions between freight railroad and commuter rail, that also comes into play about the decisions you make there. Yes, Ms. Jada.
How do you feel about Elon Musk's idea for the underground railroad in LA?
So I have had a chance to think about Elon Musk's idea, and I do think he's selling something that is not feasible, that he's selling an idea that is going to be more costly than he anticipates, and maybe he's not even telling the full story there, but it's not as the Hyperloop. I think you've noticed the Hyperloop has gotten a lot of attention lately. None has been built in the form that we're talking about. I think Elon Musk's program is a Hyperloop style effort. I just don't. I think it's more costly than they're telling people, and that's why you don't see any in action.
Oh, how did you meet? Repeat the question.
I met. Interesting. I met my wife Lorraine at the Deadbeat Club off of Evans. I think it recently burned down. But long after we met. But come to find out, we both lived in Golden, even though we met in Denver. We both lived in Golden at the time, and that kind of helped things along. But yes, it was at a dance place. I'm a very good dancer.
How do you see things change as far as perception? How do you think when you were at Martha's, you were in the extreme north, what you say, 31%?
1/3 of 1%.
And now in your professional life, you're more inclusiveness, acceptance, minorities. I just wonder, how do you feel about the progress that's been made and what needs to be done to help further?
So I think Lorraine can. Lorraine's been on she's been on some trips with me where I've given presentations and large trade group organized events, and unfortunately it just hasn't changed a whole lot. There are times I go to meetings where there's hundreds and hundreds of people or giving presentations, and I'll look out into the audience and no, there's not a big change. I think there's a couple things at play. I have noticed that the electrical field and the mechanical field seems to get a whole lot more people of color, and I don't know if it's people like Walter that attract that or what the story is, but no, the civil engineering trade certainly still could use more folks. So I think the continued efforts of getting to kids when they're younger to make sure they're taking the curriculum necessary to be successful in the engineering field is something that's still vital, as well as, you know, trying to make sure they see role models that are successful and recognize this is something that they can go do. You know, it's great to be an NBA basketball player, but you want to talk about 1/3 of 1%, I would say it's even less than that of all the players that want to play that can attain that level. There's opportunities, certainly, and just getting the word out. I can't say that, you know, Kiewit as an organization works very closely within the craft organization to make sure that the craft staff is very diverse, and I think that's gone pretty well. On the engineering side, I think it's still a struggle in attracting and retaining people of color. I don't have the answer. I wish I did, but it's still a struggle.
Just thinking about the transition that you made, and I'm not sure if you saw a connection or not in terms of not working in the serious way, but somehow you're a metallurgical engineer, you ended up with the going to the CU and getting into civil engineering. I'm wondering how you think about the spirit working in your life in terms of transition that happened from that to then that any civil engineering.
You know, certainly my upbringing and my parents, you know, it was my father that had me agree to, you know, take the plea deal, so to speak. He wanted to make sure I was doing the right thing. I think my parents and the upbringing, the religious upbringing that I had helped me through a lot of that. I could tell you I struggled mightily from a faith perspective when I felt like some of these things were happening to me. I personally took it on that things were not going to happen to me. I was going to make things happen. I would say there was a spiritual aspect to that, but I was no longer accepting of being a victim, and I was going to make things happen. And I think, if anything, there's a spiritual connection to that approach. But no, it was kind of a I'm just not going to let things happen to me anymore.
Having grown up in Detroit, I'm curious to know about your folks, their background, where they were there, and how that kind of impacted your journey.
Yeah, I thought about going into that in a little more detail, but, you know, my father went into the Army not as a result of you know, this is something I want to do. I think at the time it was, you're creating lots of trouble. There's issues with you. You're either going to jail or you're going into the service. So that was the kind of thing that happened back then. My father did not have a high school degree at the time. He got his GED while he was in the service. He actually got a what do you call it, an associate's degree while he was in the service. He preached very much a couple of things that, hey, I don't have any money. You better figure out how you're going to make it in college, and that's going to be either academically or athletically. You need to figure it out. So he kind of instilled in us the idea that we needed to excel in academics and sports, and I think that was a big part of why I excelled in academic and sports. So we never went hungry. I mean, my father, he was always working. He worked two jobs for as long as I can remember. He worked two jobs after he retired from the Air Force. He worked two jobs after he retired from the post office. He's just one of those guys that was always working. And I think that work ethic also instilled some very good practices in me. My mother was the first of her, I guess the only one in her family to graduate high school. And one of her older brother, James, passed away from a car accident. Her older sister, Sue, was a junkie. And another brother, why can't I think of his name right now? What's his name? Lorraine's got all the historical stuff through, but no, he had issues as well. So she was able to get out when they were not, and I think there were consequences to that. Obviously, the 60s in Detroit was not a really good place to be. We were able to move on from there and move to other locations and get out of some of that. So it's, I think, some really positive benefits to my father getting into service. And again, I think he was forced into the service more than anything.
As an engineer, are there any things that might keep you up at night? You know, after things were things are being to work with sometimes these areas and all that stuff. So I just want to
Yeah, there's things, as an engineer, there's things that keep you up at night, knowing that people trapping on your facilities, it's a life and death situation at every moment. So when the jobs are not complex, you feel much better, you sleep better at night. I could tell you the 18 months I was out on the Purple Line project as a design manager and engineer. So the Purple Line project is a 16.2 mile corridor of light rail infrastructure that was going to be built, kind of a standalone thing inside the Washington, D.C. Beltway. So it goes from Bethesda to New Carrollton, and it goes through the University of Maryland campus. There are a lot of unique features of that, but one of the more challenging one is it was a street running light rail. So where, as an example, the T-Rex project, all of the crossings on T-Rex are, for the light rail, are grade separated. So no interaction between cars, people, or the light rail system. This was a system that was set up to be street running, cars and trains running together, going through the University of Maryland campus, where the right-of-way wasn't very clear, people making crossings at adverse locations, trying to put up fence to prevent people from crossing when the train's trying to, yeah, that one kept me up at night. That was a real challenge. I can tell you some of the features on the Central 70 project are fairly normal construction processes. So I sleep pretty well at night for this one, but boy, that Purple Line and yeah, that kept me up at night.
Thank you so much, Del. You stay up here for a second. I guess my final question is, do you ever just drive down the road, or are you always thinking about how a road could be better? You know, like when I go to church, it's hard to worship, right? Because you're always thinking about, the service, how they're doing it. Like can you just drive ever, or are you
no,
always?
I think my kids could tell you that, no, I cannot just drive. I want to say something about every feature that's on the road, everywhere we go.
Yeah, good. Join me in praying for Del. Gracious God, what a story, what a journey, what an amazing child of God we have here in Del. Thank you for his life, for his gifts, his mind and heart, as he has kind of laid out really the roads in his life and the intersections and the places where things have taken turns. We've heard how you have been with him and how you have been at work in the struggles and in the successes. Lord, we thank you for the work ethic and the faith of his parents, the upbringing he had in the military that exposed him to diversity and to a world that perhaps looked a little bit more like your beloved creation. And as he entered college in a new phase of life, oh God, we grieve the prejudice and racism he experienced, the wounds that he still carries. And Lord, we pray for continued healing. We thank you for Dell's determination and courage and for the path that his life has took. We thank you for the gift of Lorene, Marcus, Raquel, Jada, and DJ. We pray for them as a family. We pray for Dell's continued healing. And as he balances work life and family life and moves into yet another chapter in the coming months and years, bless him. Remind him that he is your beloved child. In God's gracious and good name, we pray. Amen. Thank you.
Thank you.
Great job.